through who you'll be hearing from today. First, you'll hear from Governor Bob Ferguson, then WashDOT's Secretary Julie Meredith, then Washington Building Trade Commission Executive Secretary Heather Kurtenbach, and then Enumclaw Mayor-elect Anthony Wright. Thank you so much for joining us today. With that, Governor Bob Ferguson.
Thanks, Brianna. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. We know it's a busy time for a lot of folks, so we appreciate it. And we appreciate the hard work of the folks who work in this facility and help keep Washington State moving. I want to start by acknowledging that our state continues to go through a really, really challenging time. That's an understatement. Dealing with the impacts of this natural disaster, which truly is historic in scale and scope, is obviously the focus of much of my time, the team's time. But we have a budget we roll out as well, and the deadline for that is Tuesday, and this is a big piece of it that we're excited to talk about. But I do want to speak directly to Washingtonians who are really struggling right now. We see you. We're out there every day working hard to make sure we're getting resources to assist you, and that work's going to continue for quite some time to come, and that work will be ongoing. So today, we're excited to talk about the need for investment in our transportation infrastructure in Washington State. And what I'm going to do is, this thing is dripping so much right now that I think maybe I hate to do this, everybody. I think can I pull it? I'm sorry to do this, everybody, but I thought I could just work through it, but I think it's coming down more significantly. So my apologies to all of you if you need to adjust. Is that going to mess you guys up if I do that?
Not at all.
And I think it's going to hopefully drop right in front of the podium right now. So does that work? I think we're good.
Yep.
Sorry about that, everybody, but it's we got a little water right here. That are we all set there? All right. Thanks again for all that. So let me just start again on. We're excited to talk about the need for a significantly bigger investment into our infrastructure here in Washington State. It's fair to say that what I'll be announcing has been in the works for literally many months as we prepared this budget. This greater investment in our infrastructure, our roads and our bridges. But it's also more than fair to say that the events of the past week have really underscored the importance of this investment in light of what's happening, and you'll hear more about that from Julie in just a few moments. So to be blunt, the state has neglected its core transportation infrastructure for too long. Those are just the facts. Too many of our bridges are in dire need of repair. Many of our roadways desperately need attention. Keeping our roads and bridges in good condition saves money, helps working families, and keeps our economy moving. It also creates good-paying jobs for workers who maintain our infrastructure, and we're deeply grateful to all of them. You'll hear more about that shortly. That's why I'm announcing today a historic $2.1 billion investment that will be dedicated to preservation and maintenance of that infrastructure. This is the largest investment in preservation compared to any enacted budget of the last 2 decades. I'm just going to break it down at a high level. It includes $1.1 billion dedicated specifically to preserving our bridges. It includes $164 million for paving projects this summer, so that would be happening very soon, and an additional $756 million for paving over the next decade. So I just want to make sure I'm clear that $164 million, that's this summer. In additional, on top of that, $756 million for paving in the coming years. We have an additional $160 million that goes for a range of other projects. These are things like slope control in our passes that are vulnerable to landslides, something we're certainly seeing in the past week all across our state. If there's a failing culvert, for example, we see that from time to time. These are resources that help with those type of situations all across our state. The deterioration that happens when we delay preservation work leads to costly construction or replacement, which can often be 3, 4, 5 times more expensive than if we'd simply timely resurfaced or rehabilitated structures. This $2.1 billion in funding over the next decade represents a 34% increase in preservation funding. We have seen, of course, the consequences of inadequate funding for maintenance and preservation. We had to permanently close, of course, the Carbon River Bridge recently. That is a decision nobody wants to make, but for the safety of travelers, that was a decision we had to make. Our WashDOT teams work hard to maintain our bridges with the limited resources they have. but they were unable with those limited resources to keep the needs up of that more than 100-year-old bridge. That's had ripple impacts for the communities nearby, for community members, for the economy in those communities that are significant. I was in Wilkeson just several days ago, and we understand how deeply impactful the closure of that bridge is for all of them. So I want to put the challenge we have with bridges into some perspective. The typical life expectancy of a bridge is 80 years. 342 of our bridges are at that age or older. 80 of those bridges, 80 of the 342, are in what's described as poor condition. That's the lowest of 3 ratings that WashDOT uses to assess bridges. When a bridge is rated poor, that means the bridge has serious deficiencies such as deterioration, cracking, or even damage to its primary structure. This is totally unacceptable from my standpoint. So, Julie and I and our teams have had a lot of conversations since I've been governor, and I appreciate the information that she and her team have provided me about the state of our infrastructure. But statistics like that I find frankly alarming. And I recognize, I'm going to probably say this again later on, that preservation and maintenance work isn't the sexiest thing. I get that. Everybody likes a ribbon cutting for a brand new structure. I like that as much as the next person does. But we have neglected this core mission of our government for too long, and we need to reprioritize and focus on the needs that we have. Painting a bridge or sealing a road may not seem very exciting, but it's like changing the oil in your car or replacing the timing belt. If you skip that basic maintenance, you could have a catastrophic failure and pay more down the line. In fact, combined with structural repairs, timely painting of a bridge can protect the steel for 30 to 40 years and help prevent premature failure. Right now, again, to give some sense of perspective, there are 45 steel bridges due for painting and 60 that are past due. Let's take a look at some examples of the urgent preservation needs in our state. The 64-year-old Hood Canal Bridge connects Jefferson and Kitsap counties. 20,000 vehicles cross that bridge every single day. If this bridge had to close for emergency repairs, drivers would have a 3-hour trip to work around that. By painting the steel to prevent rusting and replacing anchor cables and other elements, we can better ensure this important connection stays open. Right now, some of the Hood Canal Bridge's many maintenance needs are nearly 15 years overdue. Going a little further south, we have the 75-year-old Tacoma Narrows Bridge. We had to close lanes 7 times between January 2024 and September 2025 for repair. We just closed lanes again last weekend. We know that is a headache for lots and lots and lots of Washingtonians. They were closed last weekend because of old bridge joints making the bridge move too much, causing cracked pavement and other breaks. We can expect more closures unless we replace those joints. The costs associated with delaying preservation are delays that have real impacts for Washingtonians, for commuters, for money spent by taxpayers, for patchwork fixes, and a shorter lifespan for the bridge. On the east side of the state, the 63-year-old BB Bridge near Chelan needs painting and deck rehabilitation. That work is at least a decade overdue. Its paint is 39 years old. Closing this bridge would result in an 83-mile detour for the community. I visited that bridge recently. It's a critical, as you can imagine, anyone who's been to Wenatchee knows how critical that structure is. These are the types of projects that funding like this can help us address. I want to take one moment just to be clear. This budget doesn't say this amount of money goes to this structure. That's not how the process works, right? We propose the funding for it. There's obviously a lot of conversations with Julie and her team, legislators, myself, to determine, once we get the amount that's determined, where specifically those projects go. I'm providing some examples of the things we've seen across the state that need help all across our state. As part of this focus on protecting what we have, WashDOT plans to dedicate 35% of the preservation funding to its paving program. Once again, fixing potholes is not sexy, I understand that, but it is important and it's a core function of government and it matters to Washingtonians. Data shows that the average cost for pothole-related repairs on a car can run into the hundreds of dollars. We're investing $164 million in this program for the 2026 paving season. That will result in paving of more than 600 miles. This represents a 66% increase in miles paved based on funding in the biennial budget that was adopted earlier this year. As I mentioned earlier, over 10 years, we'll invest an additional $756 million to pave an additional 2,100 miles of Washington roadways. I want to emphasize this is being done without raising new taxes. The funds that we're using for this are coming from bonding existing revenues that were passed on a bipartisan vote during the last legislative session. At the risk of stating the obvious, these investments are not going to fix every single aging bridge or address every road statewide. Not close. But the neglect we've seen over years means we have a big backlog that we need to address. And, climbing any mountain starts with the first step. That's the way it works. And so that's what we're doing here. We need to reprioritize how we do our budgeting. We need to focus on the basics. These basics are important to us for many, many reasons. I think this investment, however, will make meaningful progress on getting our state back where it needs to be and taking care of our infrastructure all across our state. Lastly, I just want to say that this work can feel, I can see how folks can have other priorities and where they put these dollars. But the impact to Washingtonians when we don't take care of this, they're significant. You can hear more about that from the mayor-elect of Enumclaw in a few moments. But, I've been to locations where there are bridge closures, for example, and the impacts on those communities is very real, I can assure you. It's very real for a business owner. It's very real for someone who needs to get to their hospital appointment. It's very real for just someone who wants to live their life. And we need to focus on those Washingtonians. And that's what we're proposing to do here. I so appreciate many legislators in recent weeks especially who have communicated to me their support for this greater investment and look forward to, after we hear from the other speakers, taking any questions that folks have. And I think Julie is speaking next. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right. Welcome here today. My name is Julie Meredith, and I'm the Secretary of Transportation for WashDOT. You're here today in the Olympic Region Maintenance Facility, so this is the facility that we take our large vehicles to and maintain them. We have these across the state, so thank you for coming here. I would also like to take a moment and thank Governor Ferguson for his leadership and his investment in preservation and maintenance. When I took this job, I made clear that preservation and maintenance were one of my top priorities, and the priorities I would emphasize to everyone, including the public and legislators. And I went across the state with this message and also visited our regions where it's become painfully clear that it's been neglected for far too long. This investment is critical, responsible, and the right thing to do. This is a great step forward to help address critical transportation needs for Washington State. The investment will move Washington forward, protecting critical needs and assets and avoiding the risk of costly emergency closures, delays, and detours. The improvements will help the Washington State economy, keeping freight, people, and goods moving efficiently across the state. I want to emphasize that WashDOT is ready. I'm confident that we can deliver these new miles of pavement, the bridge rehabilitation work, and the other critical projects, including slope stabilization, culvert updates, and bringing new boats to our ferry routes. On one more note, the governor noted that we've been having a challenging time with the weather, and our agency is moving now from storm response to storm recovery. We've opened over 80 roads since the storm response began. Our crews are continuing to work 24/7. We are executing emergency contracts that will remove the debris and open up the roadways going forward. And I would like to thank the public for really their patience in our response and their safety as they drive through our corridors. So, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Heather Kurtenbach. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Washington State Building and Construction Trades Council. And today's announcement from Governor Ferguson is a big win for Washington's working families, and we're very excited. A $2.1 billion investment in maintenance and preservation, to me, means more than fixing roads and bridges. It means opportunity. When the state invests in its infrastructure, it invests in people. It creates thousands of family wage jobs that lets folks buy homes, raise families, and retire with dignity. And as someone who came up through the trades, I know what that opportunity looks like. Apprenticeship changed my life. It gave me a career, not just a job. And this investment will open that same door for others, which is very exciting. Young people, women, and folks who just need a chance to prove themselves. And as Governor Ferguson said, maintenance work isn't always sexy and it doesn't always make headlines, but it keeps our roads safe and our communities connected, and it keeps skilled workers on jobs across the state. Governor Ferguson's plan shows what happens when labor and government work together. We create good jobs, apprenticeship opportunities, and stronger communities. So on behalf of the Washington State Building and Construction Trades Council, we want to thank Governor Ferguson for his leadership and his commitment to investing in not just maintenance and preservation, but also Washington's workforce and communities.
Hi, Mayor-elect Anthony Wright, City of Enumclaw. You're probably wondering, what is the Mayor-elect from Enumclaw doing down in Lacey? I want to thank the Governor and Secretary Meredith for inviting me down to basically speak about the human impact that can happen when you lose a major piece of infrastructure. Back in late August, we had the White River Bridge receive a closure due to a bridge strike. But that bridge was repaired by WashDOT and local contractors with those preservation funds until such time as I believe the Attorney General's office will be able to try and seek reimbursement from the company. And what happens when you lose a piece of infrastructure like that is, first, it just starts off simple, something like a detour, 45-minute alteration to a commute, and then you start to see the cascading effect of how that impacts multiple communities. 20,000 people use that bridge on a daily basis. And the first thing that starts to happen, the voices start to kind of rise up, you start to hear the phone calls, and it's the economic side first. It's businesses telling you that they're down 30, 50, 60, 80%. And then those just sound like percentages until they start filling out the paperwork, and then you see how really it affects them on a weekly basis. I'm down 20,000, I'm down 30,000, I'm down 100,000. And then when it comes to relief, and thanks to the Governor, we were able to have access to the SBA, that relief comes in the form of a loan. And that loan to small businesses can seem like, should I really take out more debt? Am I going to even qualify for the loan? It's a long process, and they're just kind of looking for instantaneous relief at that point. What we don't hear about is the stories about how those business owners had to turn into operators and their employees got laid off within a week because they weren't making payroll. We don't hear about the employees that basically, because the commute impacted their lives so much, where it was either childcare related or transportation issues, that they decided to quit that job to go work somewhere closer to home because of that bridge closure. Now, that's just the economic side. But then when we start to hear what happens next, it's where it hits a little bit too close to home. So when you have a community like Enumclaw tied so closely to Buckley and Pierce County, you realize that you are the healthcare provider to another 4,000 to 6,000 people. You have the closest hospital, you have the closest midwifery. There was literally women who were pregnant, who were expected in the months of September and October, who changed where they decided to give birth because they could not and did not trust walking across the Foothills Trail Bridge to make it to their appointment on time. You had seniors and people with disabilities who rely on a caravan to bring them across the bridge so that they can go to pharmacies and medical appointments. And then you start to hear about, single mothers. I remember one time I was there at 6 o'clock in the morning just because I wanted to see how many people were using the trail bridge. And I literally watched this mother with 2 of her toddlers carrying 2 car seats by herself from the parking lot in Buckley all the way across the Foothills Trail Bridge just so that a coworker could pick her up, take her kids to school for her, and then she could make it to work on time. And this occurred for over 2 months. The impacts to the infrastructure are truly real, and the longer that they go, the more pain it causes, and it has an even worsening and cascading effect. And if I could kind of put you in a little bit of an exercise, take a moment and just close your eyes. Pick your neighborhood, your town, your city. Think about the bridge that you drive across. Think about the road that you drive across. Think about what would happen to you if that bridge went down for a significant period of time. Think about if that road was unavailable. How would that impact your life? How would that impact a family member, your children, your neighbor, loved one, grandparent, coworker, what would that do to the people that you're used to seeing on a daily basis over and over again, and then watching them kind of slowly fade away because they can't afford to do it anymore? Now, we were lucky. We were extremely lucky. Not only did WashDOT rise to the occasion with the governor's leadership and help make sure that our bridge was done, but it was done early. It restored community. It restored partnership. Infrastructure means access. Access to everything that we rely on in a day of instant demand. And I cannot, again, thank the Secretary enough for her work. I thank the governor for his efforts and his leadership during that time. And again, because of this weather, what happened to Enumclaw? We have a piece of 410 washed away, and currently we're in the process of trying to get through that again so that we can restore access to Mount Rainier, to our fellow community of Greenwater, to Crystal Mountain, so people can go skiing again. It just, everything is about access. And so I just want you to take that into consideration. I really appreciate the governor's budget and what he's offering. I can't think of a better potential present for the state of Washington for Christmas, also for America's 250th birthday that we have coming up next year. So, thanks.
Appreciate it, yeah. You know, we've been looking for a slogan for this, maybe infrastructure, right? Infrastructure means access, right? It might be an appropriate one because it's really true, right? And that was, you know, my experience in visiting, obviously, the communities impacted by that bridge closure. Those were the stories over and over that you spoke to very eloquently, so thank you. And thanks, Heather and Julie, for your remarks. And we're happy to take any questions. I've got folks here who can help me out, and Katie Chapman C's here as well if it's in the weeds on the budget side and the whole team. So, yeah, Joe.
Governor, what federal commitments have you secured for roads like US 2, Interstate 90? What kind of assistance will we get from them for maintenance?
So I'll just repeat the question so folks could hear it. The question goes, hey, what federal assistance is coming or can we expect, basically? So that's too soon to say, Joel. You know, there's a process for that, as you know, and that's for roads, for infrastructure, for people harmed by the floods, all of what's going on. And so there are different applications, essentially, we make. What you see, for example, on disaster relief, we'll be making our application for that in the coming weeks. We're having conversations with local jurisdictions where we need information that we put together and make that case. Same with the roads, right? There's a process for that as well to seek reimbursement for costs that we're experiencing as a state, significant costs, by the way, as a state, to fix roads where we can seek reimbursement. So there's different processes. What I will say is I'm spending a lot of time every single day, you know, talking to my team about this particular part of our work to make sure that we are making as persuasive a case as possible to the federal government, and I'm very confident we'll make an extremely persuasive case. It'll be up to the federal government to decide what decisions they make, but we are making sure we are getting many voices to communicate to the federal government when we're ready to make that application across the board. Folks out of their homes, roads that need replacement, that whole range of what we're experiencing. We're working hard to make sure we have a very comprehensive approach to making that request.
Just to follow up on that, how much money have you already signed up for with these emergency contracts? And yesterday you had an early action discussion related to housing. Is there an early action discussion related to this infrastructure cost?
There's, I may make sure I don't forget one of your questions, Jerry, so remind me. So on the latter one first, there's a lot of conversation, as you might imagine, with legislative leaders about the crisis the state's facing. They understand, as you certainly do, Jerry, having seen this for a long time, that, you know, the budget that I'm proposing, you know, it was basically done when the storm hit. You know, as you know, these are big, complex enterprises that take many months to put together. So we have been in regular communication with legislative leaders that, hey, this session, we're going to be able to need making some adjustments once we get a full scope of the harm that's been caused by the floods and the weather through that legislative process. Conversations are ongoing on that, so I don't have an answer for you right this second, right, when it comes to this part of it. But I was talking with legislative leaders yesterday, I think it was, just yesterday. So these are active conversations, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, do you mind repeating the first question? My apologies. Oh, yeah.
I don't have that number off the top of my head. I can get
Julie
that.
doesn't have that number. We'll get that to you as soon as possible. So Brianna will follow up to see if we've got the, for the emergency contracts you're asking about and what those costs are. We can get, it's pretty dynamic situation. We can get you what we've got, and Brianna can work with Julie and the team. Drew.
Governor, I know yesterday you brought up some new funding for housing. Today we're talking about $2 billion. We all know that there's a budget deficit that's out there. How do we pay for all this?
Yeah.
And now we have these additional costs on top of
Thanks
that.
for that question, Drew. So the question goes to, hey, folks are hearing about a budget crisis we have as a state, which is true. How are we paying for this? So, oversimplifying a little bit, but the state, of course, has different budgets. Our operating budget is the part of our budget that is facing the crisis. That's the part of our budget had the $16 billion shortfall earlier this year. That's facing another shortfall in the budget that I'll be putting out hopefully Monday of next week. That budget has significant challenges. No two ways around that. Other parts of our budget are doing well. Climate Commitment Act, for example, right, is doing well. So in this particular case, and my apologies if I did not mention this in my remarks earlier, is we are using our bonding capacity to pay for this. That is routine, that is what the state does. So we actually have the wherewithal, the resources to do this work. And this is where I'm prioritizing, right, the infrastructure into this part of the budget. So this part of the budget is healthy, right? We can do this in a responsible way. This is fairly routine for us to do in a responsible way. So it's separate than the operating fund. So that is how we're able to move forward on a significant investment and a significant proposal to the legislature.
And that can be done without taking the general fund?
Correct.
And without increasing the gas tax any more than it's already going to go up
Correct.
next year. The money's there.
Correct. That's exactly right.
Like the last couple of weeks,
Correct.
adding to it.
Correct. Joel? Oh, sorry. Yep.
Go ahead, okay. You talked about this being a pool of money. No specific project's been identified, but I'm curious if you can tell me about how things will be prioritized. If it'll be regionally throughout the state so everyone will benefit, if you'll go after the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
I don't know if the secretary could address that or you could address that.
I'll start, Julie. We'll no doubt. We've had many conversations all along exactly those lines. So first, just take a half step back. Right. What we propose does not allocate, hey, a certain amount for the Hood Canal Bridge, right, as a hypothetical. It's a pool of money. It's got to go through the legislative process. Hopefully they'll end up exactly where I am, $2.1 billion, right? Hopefully they'll see it exactly as I see it. So let's say we had that $2.1 billion. At that point, and let's say we have $1 billion for bridges. Maybe that's a better example. We have $1 billion for bridges. Obviously, a lot of conversation goes on to make sure, to your point, that this covers the entire state. That's why I mentioned, for example, infrastructure we have all across the state, because that is important to make sure we're touching on communities impacted all across the state. I'll let Julie go in more detail, but of course there's a prioritization. The need is so great. We have so much infrastructure that is literally in poor condition, right, as I outlined. This won't cover all of that by any stretch of imagination. I'll let Julie speak to the kinds of conversations that go on and the prioritization. That's all right, Julie.
So thank you for the question. I think as the governor said, the infrastructure is in such a state of disrepair because of the lack of investment that we have more needs than this funding will cover. So our job will be to look at how we can do this and minimize the cost like you would. So you would want to maintain your car at the lowest cost to you. So that's going to be our attempt to maintain it. But we also need to be flexible. As you saw, we needed to invest in that bridge in Buckley, and we didn't plan for that, but it happened. So this is the fund that allows us to basically plan ahead, but also be flexible when we need to do that. So we have lots of needs that we will consult with the legislature and the governor's office over the next 10 years to invest this in appropriate spots.
And just what I'll add to that, Joel, is this is routine, right? This is how it's done, right? You have these funding, and then there's a lot of conversations to prioritize and adjusting to emergent needs that come along as well. So I'm confident we'll get to that place, right? The challenge is there's a lot of competing needs that we have right now that are equally urgent, but we'll navigate through that. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is a 10-year bond, but does it still need 60% majority, supermajorities to pass in the legislature?
It does, yes. I wanted to make sure on my first proposed budget, I think I'm getting it straight, but yes, it is, that the answer is yes.
$200 million per fiscal year, starting in the next fiscal year is what's envisioned?
The question is it 200 million per fiscal year going forward? I'm going to turn to KD to see if she's able to answer. If not, we can get you a quick answer. Katie, are we able to answer that now, or?
Or how how much the bond proceeds are anticipated to be.
Well, you get all the money up front. I'm wondering if you're then going to stagger it at an equivalent of 200 million to get to the 2.1?
Well, why don't we do this? I think that's in the details where I don't have that answer because that's in the details, but we're happy to get that answer for you, yes.
Oh, there was funding for 2 years, and a state transportation official told the Transportation Commission, we've spent almost all of it this year, and we need 170 million for the second. So is that division here basically just backfilling what you've already committed to in this budget cycle?
No, I wouldn't describe it.
You've already
Right.
planned to spend money, but you didn't have the money, right?
I'm not sure I would describe it that way. In other words, there was the budget. We're trying to move aggressively, right, to pave when we have the season to do it. We can't do that year-round, obviously, right? So there's a window in which that can be done. I've certainly encouraged the team to be as aggressive as possible. I think it's also fair to say, look, I've known for a long time I would be proposing more dollars, significantly more dollars on infrastructure. And so the goal was go big, pave as much as we can, and then we're going back to legislature for an even greater investment.
Bonds for road projects, ferries, and so forth. Why didn't you go in is this going to be a separate bond bill? This is atypical of what the state tends to do at this stage. So I guess, have you talked to the committee chairs? Have you figured out if there
We're
is
having lots of
support?
conversations. I'll have the team follow up if we want to follow up. But no, we're going to have a lot of conversations with legislators. What I will say is, as I've been in communities impacted by infrastructure needs, I've heard increasingly, and I've been talking about the need for more infrastructure and speaking to organizations all around the state, and I will say in the last few months, the momentum that I sense from legislators on realizing this is an urgent need that we need to invest in, I think is growing, so I feel confident we'll deal with this. That detailed question we can get for you. Drew? Oh, Drew?
You mentioned the Carbon River. We understand there's a bill that's been filed to rebuild that. Is that something on your list? Do we know what's going to happen with that situation? You talk about communities that are impacted.
So once again, we have a lot of needs, right? All that has to get worked out through a process, right? I don't get to decide that. And, it's not on my own. We're going to have a lot of conversations. There's a lot of competing needs. So I just want to double down on that message, right? That's why we put that on my speaking points to make sure we're very clear. I spoke about certain bridges. Those are simply examples of backlog of need. And that is all over the state. But there's going to be a robust conversation. And look, that's going to be a challenging one. Because the need is so great in so many communities. That's why I'm going as big as I feel I can possibly go with this budget on this need. I'm kind of going all in when it comes to on this bonding capacity on this, and so we'll work it out with the legislature. Any final questions? Yeah.
Or what are you going to do with the ferries?
Yes, so we have 3 new ferries are in this budget. That essentially takes up the additional $1 billion of capacity we have, and that allows us to get 3 new ferries built and continues on our trajectory of modernizing our fleet. As you know, many of our ferries are very old. The team does an amazing job of keeping those ferries together, to put it mildly. We've only, remind me, I should let you speak. How many ferries have we purchased in the last 20 years or so? Feel free to step up, introduce yourself, everybody, but if you don't mind, just give me a quick update there.
Hi there. My name's Steve Nevy. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Washington State Ferries. Like the governor was mentioning, over the last, basically by the time we get the first new ferry, there'll have been a 30-year period where we've only built 7 new ferries. And obviously that's not enough to sustain the fleet. So right now we have 21 vessels. We're trying to get to 24. So the governor's budget proposes a 24 vessel fleet so that when we get boats 1, 2, and 3, we can keep our oldest boats running. And then when boats 4, 5, and 6 come online, we can start retiring the older boats.
And I just will add that I think the mayor-elect mentioned infrastructure as access, I think, right? And you talked about, imagine a road not being there. Hey, imagine your ferry service. That is your road, right? That is your lifeline. And so I certainly view our ferry system exactly like that bridge that connected those communities down there at Indian Claw and Buckley. So that's why we're going big on the ferry investment as well. Yeah. No, the $2.1 billion is just for the projects I talked about on the infrastructure. The bridges was $1 billion. We'll have a press release. I'm sure they can give it to you, Joel. So that's $1 billion for the ferries, right? And then the breakdown I had. Let me start over. $1.1 billion for the bridges. I set my talking points down, but I broke down from there how much went to the pavement. I think I'm going to work off memory. It was like 156 million, I think, for this summer. Thanks so much. 156 million for the summer, and then an additional 700 million plus over the next 10 years. That gets us to that 2.1 billion, if that makes sense. The ferries is on top of that. We're here. We got things we can hand you. Yeah.
Actually, 3 billion?
Correct. Yep. That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay, so you'll be seeking a $3 billion bond. for the
Correct.
ferries.
2 billion is for what we're talking about here today, the infrastructure, the bridges, the roadways. Another billion for the 3 new ferries. That's exactly right.
The third ferry from the eastern.
We're happy to have that. I'll have you reach out to Brianna, and I just want to make sure I talk to the team, make sure we get you the right information on that. Yep.
Hoping to deal with here.
Yes.
How did, and this is maybe a question for the secretary as well, the last couple of weeks, these massive 410, Highway 2,
Yes.
does this delay that backlog? I mean, these are projects that jump to the front of that line, I would think, when you're talking about repairs. I guess how big an impact is what we've seen the last couple of weeks going to have on this to-do list or wish list?
Well, I'll start, and Julie may want to add, and then we'll wrap up after this question. So, I mean, first, what I want to emphasize is, we still don't know, I want to emphasize this, the full scope of the harm to our state, okay? We still have a lot of our state underwater. That includes, that is the state of things right now. So I just really want to emphasize that, right? We want to give you the best information we can, but I just want to be super clear, Drew, right? Like, we don't know the full scope. The human toll, right? And also the infrastructure toll. Number 2, and Julie can speak to this, I think she mentioned we have emergency contracts, right? We're getting help to deal with the infrastructure needs that we have right now on a very emergent basis. And so, Julie, I'm not sure if you can sort of speak any more to how this impacts this work that we're proposing here. Yeah.
First off, this is a 10-year plan, and the storm was just this last month. So I think we, as the governor said, we have a lot to learn. These emergency contracts, some of them will open the roads again, and they will continue to function. Some of them are just to get the debris off the road so that we can see what's underneath, and that's where we're at in some of those corridors. So that's why it's challenging for us to say. And I think that also highlights the need for us to be flexible when we look at the preservation dollars, because this is the funding that may need to be necessary to address some of these issues going forward, not just for this year, but in the future.
Thanks, Julie. And thanks you all for being here. We appreciate you taking time. We know how busy you are. Once again, I'll say we appreciate that the media has been, I think, just really a huge help in communicating out to the people the scope of the challenge that we're facing. And we really, it's been a huge help. So thanks everybody for being here, and hope you all have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you. And we avoided the water.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't seem so bad at first. Suddenly it was coming down,
We
right?
walked up, I was like, oh no.